I thought we would hit a few more maps and notes in that land of action facts and causes and explanations. And as some of you may have already noted, all along the watchtower as we stroll, avoiding at all times even the appearance of the ghost of Hamlet and any of his kinfolks. Some of the explanations, some of the verbal maps that I've drug out, such as explanations and causes and action facts, humanity out at the ordinary level has had reason to make notations of a certain type, all the way from historical to sociological, psychological, religious, that in fact sometimes I stop along the way and I try to drag in and say, well, this is a more something or other version. Sometimes just to make you feel good, I say it's a more complex version, or I say it's a better version to make me feel good. The reality is always there, is why some of this almost makes sense. But at the level at which it operates out with ordinary intelligence for the purposes of ordinary life, it does stay at the level of explanations. It's why it is debatable, why it is reasonable, or why it appears to be unreasonable. It's why it can be argued. It is why it apparently progresses. It is why data out there can become outdated. Whereas I'm trying to point closer, although the names I make up and descriptions are as fungible and disposable as history itself. Do not write me from the history department, assuming anybody there can still spell. But we are trying to move your attention closer to what would be causes. Forget where they actually are, but at least beyond the point of explanations. And thus, we have the tendency to come up with slightly different either words or spins on old words. So back to explanations, v causes, and action facts, and etc. Last time we were talking, I was making some note of the fact of how life uses energy in what appears to be ordinary conflicts. And this has nothing to do with history for you people out there listening from the history department or anyone else in the civilian world. But I am using, again, the sorts of things out there that have already been used, such as events, history itself. That when, in two more of our terms you recall we've been using, of primary and secondary, when conflicts out in just ordinary life are more based on territorial, more act-based conflicts, such as the recent unpleasantness when that fine country of Iraq invaded that fine, upstanding country of Kuwait, and the people in Kuwait said, would you please get the hell out? And they had to throw them out, and it took what? By all press reports, 100 hours. Done. They just threw them out. But when life needs from another view, see, last time, the reason I'm bringing this back up, we were closing out and I used the terms about efficient use of energy. It is not that that's a waste of time. Forget historically, and forget if you happen to be Kuwaiti or Iraqi or have some interest. Did you work for Exxon? That's a job. Don't be funny. It is not that that serves no purpose. But if life is wanting, let us say, a prolonged energy transfer in some local area, it will then, as opposed to what would be more primary based, such as fighting over territory, that one country simply goes in and takes over someone else's property. That is when if it gets into actual armed conflict, which we'll take as being a stepped up version of energy transformations, it is always, relatively speaking, short-lived. Just to the point. I picked out 100 hours. It could go on for several years. But as opposed to certain others that we were mentioning, when life wants what would seem to be a protracted energy kind of transfer, it will go past that point. And it will make the conflict apparently be based upon more idealistic, ideological disputes. Because when it gets there, there is not the same kind of, shall we say, tendency, historical inclination for it to be wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. But one country just runs the other one out, is a clear-cut victory one way or the other. Or if they try to throw out the intruders, and the intruders just stomped them even more in the ground. At least there is a decisive and, relatively speaking, conclusion to it. But when life wants a longer energy transfer at that locale, for whatever reason, it turns more and more to factual-based conflicts. You could make theorem 4.891 A. It's meaningless, but it sounded nice. Theorem 4.891-A. That acts tend to come in the discrete quantum short-lived variety. Forget wars for a second, territorial disputes. Sex. If you know how to do it just at all in the relatively normal sense, sex does not take 100 hours. Just to compare it to the recent unpleasantness around the Persian Gulf. It certainly doesn't take 100 years like that other unpleasantness between the fine countries of France and your friends, the British. Or eating. The closer you are to primary base, whether it be sex between two people or whether it be a conflict between two institutions, two groups of people, the closer it is to primary, even the fights over territorial disputes, which is just an outgrowth of a primary base act. It has the tendency to be quite discrete, quantum in the true sense of the word, and short-lived. You can see how it moves. You're hungry, and again, if you're fairly sane, you sit down and eat, and it doesn't take you 10 hours, 100 hours. Of course, that's not even the point. You eat, and it reaches a point that eating is no longer a conflict. That is, you're no longer hungry. The dispute has been settled, and you get up and leave. You get through with sex, you get up and you leave. Or you get up and you stay there. Whereas, this is still the theorem. Is this the world's longest theorem? Well, let's make theorem 4.891-B before we even get through referring back to A, that theorem 4.891-A is the world's longest damn theorem, at least on 4.891. Here we go back. The theorem was that acts tend to come in the discrete, quantum, short-lived variety, while fact-based situations are inclined to be complex, overlapping, indeterminably timed events. About like relatives visiting. The closer vis-a-vis is always in a polarized world, which we have to use for me to make sound waves and you to hear them. We're comparing what we're for the time being calling factual-based situations opposed to actual-based. But the actual-based, all the way from fights over territory between large groups of people down to the dance between two people of sex, or between one person and his digestive system making rude noises and he feeds it, that you can see, relatively speaking, as being quite discrete. You can see the beginning and the end of it. I'm suddenly hungry. Or you look up and you think, Jesus, where did all these Kuwaitis come from? Or these Iraqis? Where did all these British? What are you doing over here? Get out. And you drive them out and they're gone. And you look and sure enough they're gone and it's over. It is, relatively speaking, short-lived, but when you get into factual-based events, then they are inclined to be extremely more complex than simply the Kuwaitis saying, hey, you're on my property, get out. When it gets into the idealistic, the ideological conflicts between Protestants and Catholics and Muslims and Jews and whatever it is, wherever in the world, although somebody may, some historian, somebody that's no longer right up in the barricades, may be able to come up with some sort of fairly direct sounding historical precedent for all this starting, but as far as the people actually involved, it's so complex. Now, who knows why? I mean, if you ask the Protestants out there in Belfast, what in the world is going on here? The Catholics didn't come over and take over part of their neighborhood, but what would they describe? What little you keep up, which is not the point. It would get so vague if they knew any history, the so-called history of how all this came about, of the Loyalists and the British trying to protect Protestants and etc. It is so far gone now that the complexity of it would almost seem to be reflective or indicative of, let us say, the general low level of historical information in the participants as to why do you hate the Catholics? And about the best they can do is say, well, they're damn Catholics. My father hated them, that's good enough for me. I know there's some reason for it. We're not idiots, we're Protestants. It's not the same thing, we all know that. Or turned around the other way, all right? It becomes so complex and it becomes so overlapping is what I want you to see, as opposed to quantum, as opposed to actual discrete little packages that you can say, well, wait a minute. You know, the Serbs have come over here and got in our property. Get out. And when they leave, you can look around and, yeah, they're gone. You can measure it. You throw them out. You can measure it. I was extremely sexually aroused, and now I'm not. Nope, I'm not. So it's over. But it becomes so overlapping. How does the Catholics or Jews and Protestants or the Muslims, all the fights in Beirut and everywhere all over the world, and the less well-known ones? If you tried now, if you stepped into one of those conflicts in Lebanon or Northern Ireland and all throughout Tibet and everywhere, you know all this, and if you tried to say, wait a minute, I've got the power to do it, the God sent me down, they want this straightened out, and this is enough of this crap, what will it take? You got all the Catholics here and all the Protestants or the Jews and the Muslims or whoever, and you go, what will it take to straighten this out? You do hear me, it is so complex and overlapping now. If it was actually the gods themselves showed up, could they come up if the gods say, no, I'm in a hurry, and I'm ready to straighten this out, tell me what it will take to satisfy both sides? Could they even tell him? Do you hear the suggestion? What they could do is, the Catholics holler, throw all the Protestants, send them back to, the mainland. Send them over to Europe. Do something with them. Kill them. But if you said, no, come on, let's be reasonable. What will it take would be an equitable arrangement to stop this conflict. It is so overlapping, and it becomes of an indeterminably timed, which is, I repeat that because it is tricky, and it's part of the prolonged transfer of energies, because no one can any longer even see an ending to it. They don't think about it that way, but it has an effect inside the, what do they call it? The psyche of the people. It's not just stupidity that I was referring to, that if you now grab kids off the street in Northern Ireland, or in Beirut, and say, what in the world are you fighting the people across the barricades, people down the block? What are you fighting them for? Well, because we're Sunnis and they're Shiite Muslims, or we're Catholics and they're Protestants. Yeah, but I mean, why? Besides that, they're the same nationality. You grew up here, and yeah. Well, why are you doing it? They can't even see. That's why I was trying to get you to consider. If somebody would say, "We'll put an end to this. I'm the God in charge of this." What will it take to satisfy both parties? They cannot even see. It is of indeterminably timed, or it is an indeterminably timed event now, that you can't see an end to it. Whereas if you had asked, to go back to the example, the Kuwaitis 6 months ago, what will it take to stop this so-called conflict between you and the Iraqis? Anybody could have told you. Any Iraqi, a Kuwaiti was, get the Iraqis the hell out of here. That's it. They can tell anybody, get them out. And that's it. But if you ask the people when it is based more on a factual conflict, they can't even see, they can't even imagine that it any longer exists in time. It's almost part of the atmosphere. More, may I suggest, subtle mole holes in this map. Assuming enough of you see is why I was going to press on with a even more subterranean burrowing into unnoted reality. If you can see that there is a kind of indisputable, it's chemical, it's electrical, it's tangible, it's not psychological, it's not imaginary, but a prolonged, extended basis of factual driven conflicts as opposed to actual. If you can see that, then I had a never popular question. If you can see that, which you should be able to get a glimpse of that, then what if this would be true? What if that while the battling participants in any factual-based conflict, if the actual participants and any serious observers, which nowadays might include much of the civilized world, that they say would be better for the conflict over in Lebanon and between the ethnic factions in China and Tibet and India, even observers, but the participants primarily, we might say, to get you started. What if, while they're actually battling, and the participants believe as best they can that they are trying to put a halt to the conflict, that life actually wants it to continue? I almost already said all that, but based upon the great joy, the wave of enlightenment, either that or you guys are cheering for the Rams again. What if that was quite simply a valid, or at least not an invalid, verbal sketch of an additional dimension of reality? That while those involved, by all reason, by all common sense, say as best they can that, yes, I want this to stop. That you talk to somebody there in the Catholic neighborhood and they say, my husband was killed. 2 of my sons are in jail. And then right across the wall is a Protestant family. They're burying somebody. And they say, we've got to stop this. The voice of reason must take over. The Queen speaks out, the Prime Minister. What if, on top of all that, and this goes against all reason of anybody just in the middle of the bell curve of the sane neighborhoods of life, it goes against everything. But what if, in spite of all of the, let's still call them reasonable participants, don't laugh and say, well, they're silly to be killing each other over some religious idea, or especially killing each other and they can't even remember why. No. See, because they're not killing each other for no reason. They're killing each other to transfer energy. But what if, in spite of all of their best, reasonable, sane, humane efforts, that they say, and we're not questioning it, that they say we are trying every way possible to bring this to a halt? What if, in spite of that, life wants it otherwise? Literally. That life wants this so-called conflict to be prolonged. I don't think I will try at all to prove it, but let me just make a note. Sub-theorem. That what I've just described would not be scientifically, mathematically unreasonable in a three-dimensional structure that was dependent, as this is, on polarized energy. Although I admit that it goes against all reason, all sanity, I'm out about covers it, to say that in some way, while life is in some way standing by and letting people, large groups of people, kill each other over ideological conflicts that from one view appear to be less than absolutely de rigueur to live, that they're fighting over some idea of religion, or whether you should, practice your religion on Tuesday or Thursday, and they're killing each other, and something's got to stop. Life in some way is either making men say that, or at least life is not stopping them from saying we got to stop this. But then you look, the longer, the bloodier, but the longer the conflict is throughout history, and right today we've got living examples, the longer the conflict, the more it is based on fact-driven conflict, not act-based. The more it is on secondary, civilized questions than it is primary, absolutely necessary from a crude view, disputes. And although it is unreasonable, I was just going to tell you, it is not, if you could see it, it is not at all unscientific. It is not logically or mathematically unreasonable that life would let this happen. Nature would let this happen. The gods would let this happen. Of it going on, and even having people say, we've got to stop. We're working on it. We're trying to bring it to a stop. And even when that's going on, simultaneously, it doesn't cover it, but that's all you can do with words. Simultaneously, life is fueling the thing, or life wants it prolonged. If you could expand this a little bit and get closer to a 5D view, you could say that all human reason, especially expert, whether it be you, just being the common sense, humane, right-thinking person you are, or whether it be historians, diplomats, but experts could look upon the continuation of the conflict without any doubt as being a failure of mankind. While, in a more complex way beyond simultaneous, but still extant simultaneously, that from last view it could be a running hit. You could say that from an ordinary, from a rational, from any local view, something, and it wouldn't have to be just warfare now, let's change it, call it, put it in a whole theorem of some kind. But from a local, ordinary, reasonable view, something can be, from a local view, can be just a catastrophic failure. While from a more universal view, it could be a smashing success. I think some of you, in your own way, I'm not hedging and playing with words to say simultaneously doesn't cover it. That's all you can say is this is going on simultaneously. But it's not just like parallel tracks. It's not as though, as the ordinary intellect has always had to take it, that like there's good and evil simultaneous in the world, or that men individually do things consciously and then they are also simultaneously driven by unconscious desires and fears and etc. of which they cannot be aware, and so the same thing perhaps can happen with large groups of people. If that's all you're saying, I'm speaking for ordinary intelligence now to me, and so if that's all you're saying, it could be true that large groups of people are up to something, that they're driven to aggress against one another, but there's some kind of perhaps kind of social, great pool of subconscious hostility that happened between these groups 500, 700 years ago, and no one remembers it, and now it genetically kind of comes out, and so it's kind of like the collective unconsciousness of a whole group of people. See, all of that, it's not to laugh at, but all of that is explanations, and all of that's been around. And that's why I took this side trip. I'm not hedging our bets, because simultaneously it doesn't cover it. It's not like parallel or collateral realities. I've tried to describe it before. There's a Kyroot tonight that just, of course, brought the house down. That of how ordinary thinking would have it that chapter 2 must precede chapter 5. Whereas, from a more complex view, some sort of the opposite would be more to the point. Which, that is irrational, except for this. I'll run by you fast. We tried this once. Chapter 2 would have to come in front of chapter 5. Except for this. Now think about it. If we were dealing with and pretend that a more complex telling of the universe, black holes and everything, don't take it metaphysically or weird, but that everything that's called a 5-dimensional world is somewhere. And so if we're here in the 3-dimensional, or even 4-dimensional, if you're good and you've got your clocks run up to daylight savings time, then tell me this: did the 3-dimensional world produce the 5? Did it come first? Now you got to pull your brain a little bit, and you go, well, no, it couldn't. There had to be that. We got to be the children of our Father. I don't mean that religiously. If we're 3, we got to be a child of 5. Except that can't be true, because everybody knows 3 comes before 5. You can't get to 5 until you go through 3, and you're right. Except, not parallel, not just a variation, but in a greater sense, if there is a 3D something other going on, it's inside of a 5D. And the 3D couldn't produce the 5D, or the 3D would be the 5D. And it would know everything it knew. So the 5 is why I let Kyroots say that it's almost, which it doesn't cover it, see, but it's almost a form of the other way around. Almost, not really. But see, 2 cannot come before 5, other than the fact that it has to. But how are you going to go from 2 to 5 and say, well, now I'm making progress? In the ordinary world you will, because you got to go through 2 to get to 5. But if there was not a 5, like a 5-dimensional world to start with, reality, there could not be a 3. That's why I say it is not like some sort of parallel science fiction idea of 2 realities. Simultaneous doesn't cover it. There is no word to cover it, or I'd use it. Because in a polarized world, all you can do is compare two words. And you can't compare unless you're Jackie Mason, I guess. All right, try a little more. Someone just challenged me to be more subtle. They didn't really, but I love a good challenge. Consider that there are two different languages going on in all sorts of ways. To start with, there are two different languages going on. Let me set it up. With acts and facts. And they can unquestionably, the primary and the secondary, which is but they can unquestionably be seen to operate continually with no extraordinary aspects at all, that they can operate in just apparent direct opposition to one another, that they can be in absolute conflict in such a way as even ordinary people understand it. They don't necessarily talk about it. To wit, example, e.g., taking acts and facts as like primary and secondary affairs of man. People understand that you can have a person smiling and saying, "I'm your friend," or "You can trust me." And just at the ordinary level, as ordinary people would say, they can do it in such a way. I didn't go through a great deal of dramatics. Some area pull it off. But ordinary people would say with body language, if I didn't do enough, it's like somebody saying, "Hi, we're in the neighborhood and we had some leftover aluminum siding doing a job down the street, and we'll do it for you. Oh, by the way, you can trust me. I'm your friend. I like you. You got a real beautiful house. What a nice little person you are, a little kid." Somebody can smile, someone can say the words, "I like you, I'm your friend, I've always admired you," and yet ordinary people, that's an accepted fact. Nowadays referred to as body language, but now we're talking about the difference between the kind of language between a fact-based reality and an act-based, between primary needs and secondary concerns, so that you can say, you or anybody, smile and say, "Hi, you can trust me, I'm your friend," wherein the just ordinary people understand through body language, let's just call it that, which is a primary based tongue, silent. They understand, oh no, you understand the person is smiling saying, "I'm your friend," but the other language, the body language let's call it, is saying otherwise. Now anybody knows that. Your mother knows that, your father, people out in the street, and you do not have to analyze it. They might later. They might try to talk about it, but on the spot, just sane, ordinary people, when the dichotomy between the primary-driven language and the secondary-driven language just gets a little out of whack, just too much out of whack, no one is fooled, to put it that way. In other words, you hear that there are two distinct messages going on. The person's facial countenance is a textbook drawing of a smiley button. And they're offering their hand, and their words saying, "Hello, friend. I'm your friend. I am a friendly person, and I love to meet people like you with whom I can be friends." And yet something tells the person, forget any later analyzation of what kind of cockamamie story they come up with, just on the spot, you understand, I'm not going to do business with this person. You just understand this person is not my friend. I got to get out of here. You understand it. Nowadays, it's not a matter, by the way, that one of the messages is right and one is wrong. It is simply, I want you to see that there are two languages going on. Now, everybody knows that. Even psychologists know that. Ministers know that. People selling books and magazines door to door know that. In a similar vein, to get out of the local neighborhood, if you can follow it right quick, and from a more universal view, you could take the reality of what I just pointed out, which is common knowledge nowadays. and say that in a similar vein, life and man have two different languages. They speak in two separate tongues down at this level. And you could say that life speaks in causes and man speaks in explanations. And they can go on, to say the least, simultaneously. Hello, I'm an explanation. And yet something, even though people do not need to talk about it, because that part, if they talk about it, it has then, of course, become part of the other tongue. That is, to go back to body language or subconscious motivations, as they call it in the ordinary world. If a person smiles, hello, I'm your friend, and I'm going to put aluminum siding on your house at 1/10 the ordinary price. And you don't know anything about the price of aluminum siding. You've never seen this person before. You know. You're just an ordinary person. You know. Run for your life. You know that the message coming out on the surface, the secondary, the civilized message, you know is in conflict with something else. That it's not the same message. Can you consider on this expanded version, because this is just a weaker, a more condensed version of what I am suggesting, that life itself speaks one tongue and man speaks another. And in light with the kind of examples that we've been extracting from life in the last few nights, is I was trying to get you to consider that life would be speaking more in the tongue of causes. Silent, albeit, in the same way that body language, just to go back to a crude example, the everyday example, is silent. Because if it starts talking, it's no longer body language. It is then language, and I'm just using ordinary terminology, nothing funny, just any psychology book or any paperback book on body language was popular for 6 months. It's got to be silent to be, as they used to call it, body language. What I am telling you is a greater manifold background behind that, or suggesting to you, would be that life itself is speaking more in causes, but it speaks in a silent tongue. While men speak verbally, men would be the variation of the guy smiling and saying, whatever it was, but saying, I'm your friend. Or we're in the neighborhood and we had some extra aluminum siding left on the truck, and rather than take it back over to the yard and go to all that trouble, we would rather, especially to a nice, friendly looking, honest person like you, I bet you're a Christian. No, Jewish? Oh, we are too. Muslim? Oh yeah, Bobby's a Muslim. But rather than take it all back, we would prefer to put it on your house because it's such a pretty house and you're such a pretty person. That would be man's language. The explanation. Well, why are you going to do this for me? Well, because I figured what religion are you? The person says Presbyterian. I knew it. Bobby, didn't I tell you? We're all Presbyterians. So there's your explanation of why they're going to give you the aluminum siding at 1/10 the ordinary price. But it's verbal. You might then think something smells. If there is another message going on, what I'm telling you is no longer just, and we're not talking about commercialism, we're not talking about home repairs, I am talking about that there are two distinct languages going on at all kinds of levels. But a greater background that people do not ever consider, they have no need to, is life itself, for its own purposes, speaking in one tongue and man in another. And they can be in such conflict as the examples that you may have thought we already left, that humans, the cream of the secondary world, the reasonable, intelligent, humane people are sitting around trying to figure out how to stop a conflict over here between two ideologically driven factions. And talking about it day and night, they stay up, they're driving themselves crazy, they're ruining their health, losing some of their businesses, they're leaving their law practices, coming over there trying to meet, to help. And life is speaking another silent language, not wanting it. Life wants it to continue. That's the kind of, forget traveling out west, the kind of continental divide that could be, I suggest, excellent to you between life speaking in a silent, it's always silent, can't be otherwise, speaking in a silent way that would be closer to causes, wherein man is speaking in explanations oftentimes, passing for causes, accepted to be causes, in lieu of the fact that no causes seem to be forthcoming, that nobody can really grasp what they are. And you have what amounts to two separate languages going on, and yet they coexist. But if you begin to see that, as our phony baloney Greek choir from Arkansas back here, you guys are not ready? Likes to say, that sure would do it. That sure would explain a lot. Not to anybody else. How about another aspect of the whole affair, assuming you still have some reasonable grip on the glimpse of how explanations are taken to be causes, how they're supposed to be. But another way that this operates is not normally seen is for you to properly function, an ordinary person, you generically speaking, to take explanations as being causes. It's necessary that your thinking stay very local. It is necessary that your thinking of the matter, whatever it is in question, must stay local, it must stay self-centered, it must stay self-referring. It must. When that happens in any question you have about a situation, an episode, whatever it is that you're thinking about, when that happens, then it's as though whatever the problem, whatever the question is, it's as though it just suddenly began with you or your interest, such as the good contemporary examples. My son, Billy Bob, is a dope addict because of his absent father, the guy that often left me and little Billy when he was 6 months old. Or my son is a dope addict because of the unhealthy pressures of our sick society. And people go. Now that's all quite proper out in life. And if you say, well, what's the cause of Billy Bob? We've been through this. What's the cause? And the woman, perhaps now Billy Bob's psychiatrist, says, well, there's no doubt about it. The little kid is a drunk or a dope addict because the reason, the cause, is because his father was. His father left. Or it's the kind of unhealthy pressure going on in school. He hadn't been able to academically compete or whatever. But it's an explanation, you understand. We've been through part of this, but I want you to see that for ordinary people's thought, you have to stay local in your thinking. You have to stay self-centered insofar as whatever it is, whatever the question, whatever it is you're thinking about, it's as though the situation, the problem, whatever you call it, it's as though just out of the clear blue sky, out of all eternity, out of all infinity, it's like it just suddenly, it just suddenly started with you. Or in this case, with little Billy Bob. It must, you understand? It must just suddenly start there. It's what I have tried to get you to see. Many times I use self-centered and kept warning you that I don't mean in any kind of ordinarily perceived pejorative use of that term of self-centered, like, well, it's somebody that's an egomaniac. It's not that. It's your thinking has to operate as though you are a unidirectional, you hope, little receiving antenna, and all the information coming in, even if you theoretically say, well, now information coming in from all kinds of sources, I give it credit. No, you don't. You got the little AM receiver up here, and it takes the credit. Yes, I've thought of that before. Since when? Well, since I heard about it. See, people can't do that. The information doesn't exist until it comes in here. That's what I mean by self-centered. It is as though, literally, you are the center of the intellectual universe. It got nothing to do with egotism. Nothing. It's that you cannot think about it unless you start the sentence. Unless I, that is what I'm thinking, is in the center of it. There's nothing worthy of attack. It's not a culpable offense. You've got to do that at the ordinary level or you could not think. But what does it do? It makes it work, for one thing, of course. That is the ordinary thinking process. But the second is, it's as though, without any, it will not stand, of course, in the analyzation beyond the ordinary. It's as though whatever the situation or the problem, of why is little Billy Bob like this? Why am I this way? Why has this happened to me? It's as though it just suddenly happened. What is the cause, I ask you, of this fine young teenager is now an alcoholic, a fool? I forget that. He's a drunk. 16 years old, what's the cause of this? And the experts, if not the mother or the father, but the experts finally, his father was a notorious drunk, his father was a ne'er-do-well, etc. And no one nowadays, it will be accepted as common sense once you know the facts, and it will be accepted as expert explanations as to the cause. But it's not explanations as to the cause, it's explanations as to the explanation. Because, as we've been through, you cannot go, well, by God, that makes all the sense in the world, except could I ask you this? Yes, what? What do you think made Billy Bob's father drunk? See, now you have gone back too far to have to use three-dimensional terminology. It has got to be as though, even though you know it's not true, but it's got to be as though, let's call it the Billy Bob drinking problem. My son Billy Bob's drinking problem. It has got to be as though you just turn around one day and you finally faced up to the fact that the kids are drunk. It's as though it just suddenly happened. Now, of course, ordinary people say, well, I knew it didn't happen. I know he'd been drinking a little. But if you say, well, what caused it? Whatever the explanation is as though it just suddenly started somewhere in an area wherein you, or at least your interest, in this case your kid, wherein either you or your interest are at the center of it. That the whole question, all the explanations, the apparent causes that are given have got to be self-referring. And it cannot go outside the neighborhood. In other words, you cannot say, well, wait a minute. Now, it sounds all right, except what made Billy Bob's father like that? Or more despicable, if the explanation was of the cause, well, wait a minute. We're talking about the unhealthy influences of an obviously increasingly sick society. Look at the advertising. Look at sports figures drinking beer. Movies. Everybody sophisticated has a little drink in their hand. It's that kind of unhealthy influences from Hollywood, probably a bunch of communists, and advertising, a bunch of idiots, liberals, who knows what. It's that kind of unhealthy influence has made people like Bob, little Billy Bob, now drunk. It's 16. It's despicable. And people are going, yes, yes, yes. But except you cannot leave that neighborhood. You cannot leave it being self-centered. You cannot leave it being self-referring that the problem just suddenly went boom, and it just started here. Because you got to say, wait a minute. This thing about advertising. You mean that there's a whole bunch of conspirators. They're sitting around and thinking, what can we do to just really screw up everybody? Or we've been through this. If you cannot see that, then I don't know what you're ever going to see anyway. It is no conspiracy because there is no society. There is no advertising. There is no, I know there's advertising companies. I know that there are advertising agencies. I know that there are all sorts of associations. The brewers have their own association. But it's not a conspiracy. There is no association. There is no brewing industry. There is no advertising industry outside of people. People. And then you say, well, all right, the people involved are no good. But you can't do that because now you got to say, all right, why are they no good? And there you go. Self-referral. Well, I don't know. They got influenced by unhealthy influences in society. So that's what caused advertising to go astray. Yes? Okay. May I ask you this? No! 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 I guess we're going to have to wrap it. You cannot push the inquiry into what causes things to happen, what causes people to be like they are. You cannot push it outside the safety at the ordinary level, up here, with ordinary people. You cannot push it past the safety of your own neighborhood. You can't go back any further than where the problem seemed to have had some personal significance to you or your interests, such as your kids, your business. It's when it starts there. You simply can't go back any further at the ordinary level here. You cannot say, well, wait a minute. This company, they lent me money to start my little business, and then there was a whole bunch of fine print, and now they're about to wreck me because of the usury that was hidden in there, the kind of charges and the kind of late pay. They're killing me. And you can say, well, it's some kind of evil plot. It has to start there because you can't say, well, wait a minute. Let's go back and investigate what they're up to. The attitude has to be, stuff that. I don't care what they're up to. They're mistreating me. That's the way it has to be. How about a closing theorem? It's not a Kyroot. It's being faxed, even as we speak. How about this? Explanations only fly when they leave exclusively from your airfield and always on a Virgin flight. That covered it, whether you heard it or not.